Paramahansa Yogananda's book, God Talks with Arjuna, is the most important book I've ever read. I had been thinking for years that at some point I wanted to read this book, which is Yogananda's very detailed analysis of the Bhagavad Gita, but with the book being more than 1,200 pages long, I realized that I had to be really, really ready and motivated to take on this challenge. Then I was listening to a lecture given by one of the SRF monks, and he said that Sri Dayamata, the SRF monastic who was the head of Self-Realization Fellowship for more than 50 years, said that the mere reading of this book will transform the individual. That was all I needed to hear to then let me know that it was now time for me to step up and begin reading the book. So I read the book in the digital Kindle format, and I highlighted the important passages that spoke to me quite profoundly along the way, as you can do in the ebook format by dragging your finger across those passages. And I really recommend highlighting sections like these, whether you read the ebook version or the printed version of the book, because you can then go through the entire book over and over again when you finished it and reread those sections that have impacted you the most profoundly, which for me has been a very, very powerful experience. So for me personally, Sri Dayamata's statement that the mere reading of the book transforms the individual is a profoundly accurate statement, as between my first reading of the book and the maybe 20 or so times that I have since reviewed the many profound passages that I had highlighted, I am amazed at the complete feeling of transformation that I feel this book has brought upon me. As a result of this, I feel much calmer and more peaceful in my life. I feel happier with what I'm doing day to day, and I feel that I am now much closer to God and feel that I understand more about His plan for me and what I must do to commune with Him at an even higher level, too. I also now better recognize that there is only so much that I can impact and change within the world, but that I have much more control over my inner world through my own spiritual development, my meditations, my following of the SRF program and its principles, and my focus on remaining calm and not letting things get to me. This book represents Yogananda's very detailed analysis of the Bhagavad Gita, which is a book that I've read several times, but whose meaning, for the most part, went over my head. But through reading God Talks with Arjuna, I realize much more now the deeper hidden meaning within the Bhagavad Gita, as Yogananda has done a tremendous job in simplifying it. I cannot truly express in words how important this book has been to my spiritual development and to my life, and how important it continues to be through my ongoing rereading of the passages that I've highlighted within it. I'm someone who completed doing the SRF lessons years before I read this book, and I recommend that you complete doing the lessons first also, as I believe that studying these lessons laid the foundation for me to understand God Talks with Arjuna at an even deeper level. But as I mentioned, the book is more than 1,200 pages long, so I treated it with the idea that this was a marathon, and I wasn't running the marathon to beat any particular time on the clock, but rather to complete the marathon whenever it was appropriate for me to complete it. So whenever I'd set aside time to read the book, I simply read it as long as I could during that particular sitting, and then I picked it up again the next time to do the same. In addition, I noticed that I now have very little fear of death after reading this book, and I understand more now that death is really just a part of life. And Yogananda even mentions in the book that people's fear of death oftentimes is greater than it really needs to be, and that life is over in an instant, and it's really not worth spending that much time in worrying over it. Something else that became clear to me in reading the book is that so much of our own individual life is determined by God, and that God is actually acting through us at all times, influencing our destiny and our thoughts, feelings, emotions, and actions. While oftentimes many people believe that we are the only ones who are impacting our own lives and our own destiny. This has enabled me to relax even more, in knowing that I am part of God's overall plan and that my life is really perfect right now, just the way it is, according to His plan. I may not necessarily always feel that my life is perfect, but reading this book has given me much more certainty around this. In addition, when I'm continually doing my meditations, I live in the state of better knowing and understanding that my life right now really is perfect and that I'm exactly where I'm supposed to be. In addition to this, something that has deeply impacted me from this book is Yogananda making it very clear that people who are continually engaged in pursuing material success as their number one priority in life, generally speaking, aren't happy. They may appear happy to us, particularly if we see them having great income, assets, and material possessions, but this is oftentimes just our assumption when looking at someone who has these things, when looking at them from our own perspective. With this in mind, Yogananda makes it very clear that those who pursue the material path are oftentimes beset with ongoing worries and concerns continually throughout their lives. And as they get closer to the end of their life, the onset of illness or frustration can then get a hold of them when they recognize that they cannot completely control their own lives or their own destiny, as well as control the aging process within their own bodies. So in putting all of this together, this book made me realize that the only true long-term happiness comes from communion with God. And this has greatly accelerated my devotion to my meditation program, producing absolutely wonderful results. With this in mind, if this sounds like a book that you may be ready for, then go for it. As I mentioned, I recommend that you complete the SRF lessons before reading the book, but if you haven't done so and you really feel compelled to read this book, then move forward and do it. In addition, be patient when reading the book, as it's the overall journey of reading and completing the book that will have the greatest impact on you. When I began reading the book, it took a while for the profoundness of the passages to begin jumping out at me as I was reading, but once they did, I began highlighting many passages within the book soon after that, and I now have an amazing treasure trove of these great passages to review and then let them sink in over and over again. In summary, this is the most important book I've ever read in my life. And if you are on a spiritual journey, and most specifically, if you are a self-realization fellowship practitioner who is committed to your own spiritual transformation, I highly recommend that at some point along in your spiritual journey that you take the time to read this book.